incorporate it in some way, potentially. So again, you conduct open-ended interviews to get people's belief about the hazard and risk in their own terms, and then how does that mental model correspond to the mental model that you've obtained from experts? And there you can identify the issues and where the disconnect is occurring, and then you go through a more deliberative method to draft risk communication strategies. But I really like not so much the whole process, but this visualization of what risk is about. So Kara Morgan, in a paper in risk analysis, did this for nanoparticles. And so and I think she did a real nice job of these influence diagrams for risk analysis of nanoparticles. But the diagram doesn't include the social and kind of political and decision-making factors that you could also include in this diagram. And in fact, that's what Morgan did in this recent paper that just came out, this month in risk analysis, and they did it for bubonic plague. And what they did is they put the risk management strategies in and the things people would need to know to reduce their risks. And so I really like the influence diagram as not only a study of risk communication, but a tool for risk communication. And I think that's the point that I want to make here. And can we also use it then to inform people about the mitigation strategies that they could take on their own to reduce their risk? And that's precisely what they did with this bubonic plague article that just came out. So, but the problem is again, that we don't, if you just take one of these, and this is the toxic effects module. So where's the toxic effects? Here, right here. If you just take one of these, behind that simple box is a whole other influence diagram. Okay, so this is getting really complex now, and these are the things we need to know in order to really assess the human health risk, just in that one box of toxic effects. So we're up against a big challenge here as people who care about communicating about risks to the environment, especially risks of nanomaterials or nanotechnology, because if you place this is for chemicals in the environment, basically. But if you place, active nanostructures on top of that are based on biological molecules that can move and change shape as they go along, you've got the ambiguity component and the extreme complexity component of it. Okay. So my goal is to help the public understand the complexity component. I mean, I don't want them to, I don't think, they're going to really care about the gory details of an allergenic response to a nanomaterial. But I think they will care about, and they can understand, and they want to understand how this risk information is framed, what it means, and what you need to know for risk. I think they have the ability and the capacity, and many people who I've engaged with, even lay people who know nothing about nanomaterials, just in casual conversation, really hit upon the deep questions. And so I think we shouldn't skim over this uncertainty and this complexity necessarily. And I think if we can communicate that in good ways, and that's what you all are here for, that we could really enhance understanding of emerging technologies and risk. So I think that's my point, and it's kind of summarized on this slide, is equity and risk discussions. So we've got these problems and gaps, vacuums, barriers, filters, complexity, ambiguity between experts and non-experts. And I've been told that non-expert is no longer a good term, so I put not expert or inexpert. And can we level the playing field in a sense so that we can get to the true differences in attitude rather than differences in reception and understanding of information? That to me would be the ultimate goal. I don't want to change people's attitudes about nanomaterials. I want to level the playing field a bit so that they can make their own informed decisions. The problem here, though, again, and I've already talked about these things, even experts do not have the information for all those boxes, and any individual study about risk does not put the puzzle together. So how to communicate with stakeholders and laypersons about risk based on just one or a few pieces of the puzzle, I think is a pretty big challenge. Possible approaches to test would be to map this expert model onto the layperson model and kind of follow the standard approach, the Morgan et al. Approach in their mental models book. And another way possibly would be to map expert studies into expert models and forgo advice answers for context and framing. Use expert framing of risk for nanomaterials to type individual pieces of information. Visual and contextual translation for not expert audience. So let me go here. So this is one thing that I think it would be nice is if when individual studies come out, we have some sort of framework within which to place them visually for stakeholders, and so they get a sense of, and the public, so they get a sense of where that study is fitting into the overall risk assessment framework. And that's actually what we proposed in a grant to the NSF. Is to develop a database which would have different levels to it. So you would have like a taxonomy of environmental health and safety information within a risk analysis framework. And you could have different levels. Level 1 could be the basic level of where does this study fit into the framework for public educators and stakeholders, for the people who get their information on the web. Level 2 would be for more environmental health scientists and other interested experts, and different other levels would be for getting more into the details of each one of these boxes. But I do think we need to move towards more framing of individual studies within the risk assessment continuum. Let me back up a little bit here. I wanted to say a little bit about the possibilities, other possibilities. So we have this idea that objective risk is based on empirical information, and subjective risk includes people's perceptions of that information. And so I think that there's blurred distinctions between these two, but this database could fit into more of providing the information and the empirical information in a context. Subjective risk, I think we need to listen and learn, incorporate concerns and values into risk analysis framing of problems, and I'm very much in favor of the deliberative democracy and public engagement approaches. But again, subjectivity comes into play in assessing objective risk, and objectivity comes into play in subjective risk. So there's not a dichotomy here, but I think there are different strategies in communication for presenting and dealing with that information. So that's why I parceled it out here, although I'm not in favor of making a huge distinction between the two. I mean, the interpretation of scientific evidence is very much a subjective process. Deciding what questions to ask in any experiment or what problems to address in risk assessment is very much a subjective process as well. And I think that the subjective notions that the public has about risk are based in part on objectivity and what they've seen, what they've amassed. So there's not a distinction here, but I do think that this database addresses more of the objective information that people need. So I'll talk a little bit more about strategies for subjective risk in a little bit. But a second strategy, which this table is in a book chapter that'll be coming out, is framing studies as to just the basic questions one might ask about risk. So this is kind of a typology or taxonomy, depending on if you're a social scientist or a biologist, about questions about risk. And so one other approach might be just framing it with, why do we care about the risk? What is causing the harm? Who is potentially harmed? How might the harm occur? Where does the harm take place? And when does the risk occur? So you see the what, where, how, who, why questions. And there's the very complex nature of nanotechnology risk assessment that can be framed within these questions in different ways. So this is a table I'd provide to you if you wanted. I'm not, it's just a first stab at it, but it's a way of, again, structuring the information to enhance the public's ability to make their own informed decisions about risk. Excuse me. So it's just another possibility that we could think about in our study about testing different messages and variables. Let me put this back on and then I'll talk some more. Okay, just in summary then, there were two ideas just thrown out.